I would never have believed that my wife would be able to cheat on me. But this whole illusion began to crumble when I began to pay attention to small details, and then everything became clear to me. My wife is cheating on me with my colleague. My name is Brian Banks, and I'm a bit of an oddball. I have borderline social anxiety. I'm about as athletic as a potato, and I'm not into drinking, sports, or typical male bonding activities. I'm reasonably good-looking and thin, even though I never actually exercise. But my standout trait is that I'm smart, really smart. And unlike many intelligent people, I'm also pretty perceptive. Despite my borderline social anxiety and the fact that I missed 1 grade in elementary school, I didn't lose touch when it came to intimate activity, thanks to the neighborhood I grew up in and the schools I attended. I lived in an area where the standard of living was below average, and for some reason there were a lot of active girls about my age. I stayed at home during college since one of the top 5 engineering universities in the world was only a 10-minute commute from my house. In exchange for helping the active women in the neighborhood with their homework, completing their homework tests, or teaching them various subjects in high school, and then at a local college, I received my own education in the field of betting. Between the ages of 18 and 21, I was almost always satisfied, and more than half of the women I helped, and they, in turn, helped me. During this time, I have had fun with 11 different women, many of them several times, although I have never had an official relationship with any of them. It was a simple, though very pleasant exchange. Knowledge in exchange for intimacy. At that time, there was only one woman. She was always called Jezebel on the street, instead of her real name, Whitney, whom I did not treat so gently. But it wasn't because I wasn't trying to be kind to her. Jezebel was about my age. She was a tall woman, about the same height as me, and at that time probably weighed 5 or 10 pounds, more than me, although she was not overweight. Although her face was rather ordinary, everyone who knew her, including me, agreed that she had one of the most divine bodies possible. Jezebel was very active, enjoyed intimacy, and had no problem getting almost any guy she wanted. She was also athletic, playing softball and basketball in several leagues. Although she wasn't particularly educated, she wasn't stupid, and she had more ambition than most people in our neighborhood. Her main goal was to create her own studio for the production of adult content. I taught her mostly math and business to help her achieve this goal. Jezebel told me, and I believed her, that I was the only guy she allowed to have fun with her without protection because she believed I didn't have any diseases. Jezebel was the only woman of my acquaintance who ever engaged in intimacy with me, without first resorting to any academic help. 6 times, and each of them is etched into my memory of social awkwardness, she called me late at night, just asking if I wanted to have a good time. And when I came to her house, she, of course, did what she promised. I never fell in love with Jezebel, but I definitely liked her, and I would do anything for her. In my senior year of college, I invented a programmable, encrypted proximity sensor, similar to the EZ pass system used on toll roads in the United States, but designed for security systems. Various versions of this software have been adopted by corporations with their own systems, several government agencies, and even the military. I had to get security clearance to patent my own inventions. My inventions earned me substantial patent royalties, allowing me to establish 2 companies, one for selling products to various markets and another for researching new ones. Since I lack management skills and am solely focused on inventing and product engineering, I had my lawyers create a complex network of shell and holding companies that owned my 2 main businesses. I owned all the stock in the top-level holding company, but it would take an experienced and diligent search to trace that back to me. Although I never used this structure to evade taxes, some of the entities were based offshore to make it harder for anyone tracking ownership to find me. The only individuals aware that I was the ultimate owner were the CEOs and CFOs of the two operating companies. To everyone else, I was just a salaried employee heading the new product engineering department at one of the companies. By the time I turned 24, I had applied all of the above strategies and was striving for a long-term relationship with a woman. It wasn't easy for me because of my borderline social anxiety, and since I stopped using my intelligence as a means of gaining affection, the process has become even more difficult. However, after wandering through various online dating platforms and various social groups, at the age of 26, I finally met a man I really fell in love with and who reciprocated my feelings. Allison was probably the most attractive woman who had ever shown a real romantic interest in me. Besides her beautiful face, she had an amazing figure. Although our relationship developed relatively traditionally, looking back, I realized that it was more superficial than most others. I was so fascinated by her appearance that I overlooked some qualities that others might consider necessary in a spouse. Throughout our relationship, I constantly noticed her complete lack of interest in my work. She never asked about it, seemed uninterested, and whenever I brought it up, she acted like she didn't understand, without showing the slightest curiosity. Allison's disinterest in my work proved useful when it came to the prenuptial agreement. Gail, one of the lawyers who helped me start my companies, and a person I respected very much, was adamant that I should sign a prenuptial agreement. In fact, when I hesitated after I proposed to Allison and got her consent, Gail threatened to stop working for me if I didn't present the agreement to her. Gail drew up a simple and honest prenuptial agreement. It simply stated that any shares, interest, or royalties from any company or patent that either of us owned by more than 10% before marriage or that were acquired during marriage would be excluded from common ownership. Allison asked her father to review it and signed it without any questions. The intimacy with Allison has always been great. I had been married to Allison for about 2.5 years, and we already had our first child, a beautiful little girl named Amber, when I unexpectedly bumped into Jezebel on the street during a quick solo visit to my parents' house. I had offered to buy my parents a new house in a more upscale community, but they were content with their simple lifestyle and close-knit neighborhood, so they declined. Jezebel looked great. She hadn't gained a pound since I last saw her and was dressed better than ever. We grabbed a coffee together and she told me about her latest business venture, while I stuck to the usual story about being a salaried employee. It turned out Jezebel was launching an adult website but was struggling with finances. After subtly asking more about it, I found out she only needed an additional $25,000 to get everything up and running the way she envisioned. I told her to meet me again in a week, same coffee shop, same time, and that I might be able to introduce her to an investor. She was thrilled and gave me a big hug and a sloppy kiss on the cheek before I left. I thought about it for the next week. The $25,000 was insignificant to me, and despite the questionable nature of her business idea, I still had a soft spot for her. A week after our first meeting, we met again, and this time she looked even more stunning. Her outfit was more revealing, showing that she still had the same amazing figure that I remembered from our student days when we were together. But now her face and hair looked even better than before. As soon as our coffee was served, I handed her an envelope with $25,000 in cash. Jezebel was completely stunned. She actually started crying, which was unexpected for a person who usually looked so stern. As a sign of gratitude, she invited me to participate in her website, but I politely declined, explaining that I just wanted to give her a gift without any conditions. Then she put her hand on my hip and offered to have an intimate relationship with me, which, as she promised, would surpass all previous experiences. Although I believed that she would keep her word, I politely refused again, telling her that I love my wife. "Your wife is a happy woman," Jezebel said through tears when we said goodbye. "If I can ever do anything for you, just ask and it will be done," she added sincerely. "Have a great success." I gave her a big smile before giving her a warm hug. Allison and I had 2 more children. Our second daughter, Whitney. No, I didn't name her after Jezebel, but I fully agreed when my wife suggested the name. And then a son, Jerry. While my physical relationship with Allison was always great, over time I came to realize that she was somewhat shallow and materialistic. Despite that, she had many good qualities, and I truly loved her, the only woman I had ever loved. What mattered most to me was that she had given me 3 wonderful children. Amber, 12 at the most relevant point in this story, inherited her mother's beauty and the best traits from both Allison and me. She was just as smart as I was, testing at a genius level, but far more social. Whitney, 10, was also beautiful, though she got some of my features that, while not unattractive, didn't quite match up to Allison's or Amber's looks. However, Whitney was the most caring, loving, and empathetic person I had ever known, and her presence could brighten any room. She wasn't lacking in intelligence either. Jerry, 8, was simply a fun-loving boy. I'm not sure where it came from, perhaps from Allison's side, but he was quite the athlete. I developed an interest in baseball and basketball just so I could have meaningful conversations with him about his favorite sports. He was always in a good mood, never had a bad word to say about anyone, and got along perfectly with his sisters, and they with each other. You might assume that having such wonderful children would make me consider Allison a great mother. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Most of the disagreements between Allison and me revolved around parenting. I'm not entirely sure what the issue was. Perhaps it was simply jealousy. But Allison had a strained relationship with Amber. She was overly strict and sometimes harsh in her remarks toward her. I had several heated arguments with Allison in front of Amber when she treated her unfairly because I couldn't stand it. By the time Amber turned 12, things had deteriorated to the point where she refused to go anywhere with her mother unless I was there too. This became a major issue one summer when Allison wanted to take the kids to her family's lake house for a week while I had to work. It took everything I had to convince Amber to go, and I had to confront Allison to make sure she would be kind to Amber during the trip. Although Allison was better with Whitney and Jerry than she was with Amber, she had her moments with them too. And despite being a stay-at-home mom, I likely spent just as much time with the kids as she did, since she always seemed to have some event or activity to attend. Plus, the time I spent with them was generally of higher quality. Having been married for about 15 years, having 3 wonderful children and a wife, whom I deeply loved and enjoyed intimacy with, despite the fact that I did not have a perfect marriage, I was driving home from the airport after a one-day business trip. It was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Even though I shared my itinerary with Allison, she, as usual, didn't pay much attention to it, so I wasn't sure if she would be home to greet me. If so, I was hoping to have some fun after lunch, before the kids get home from school around 3:30. When I was standing at the stop sign, about to turn right onto the main street where I lived, a familiar car drove by. It was Roger Mayberry's distinctive red Corvette. The top was down, and I could clearly see him sitting in the driver's seat and tuning up the radio, and music was pouring out of his special speakers. Roger Mayberry was one of the leading salespeople in one of my companies, primarily focusing on military sales. He had as solid an understanding of our technology as one could expect from someone without an engineering background, and he had a naturally approachable way with people. Like nearly all of our employees, he held a top-level security clearance, though his was even higher than most because the military aspects of our technology were particularly sensitive. I naively wondered, what's Roger doing here at this time of day? Since the street I live on is a through street, it didn't cross my mind that he could be near my house just a couple of blocks away. I was simply curious about what work-related reason might have brought him to this part of town. About a minute later, I pulled into the driveway, entered the house, and not finding Allison on the ground floor, climbed the large spiral staircase that she adored and which just had to be to the second floor. The sound of my boots on the marble floor echoed with a distinct pop, pop as I approached the open door of the master bedroom. When I was about 10 feet from the entrance, I heard a voice. "Did you forget something, Raj, or did you come back for another deposit?" Stunned, I entered the master bedroom and saw Allison lying on the bed. She looked like she was doing sports, but not regular sports. Her smile quickly turned to panic when she looked up and saw me. She breathed out, "Oh, Brian, God, I'm so sorry." At that moment, my mind became fully aware of the situation, and a storm of emotions, anger, disgust, anxiety, hatred, and fear, overwhelmed me. I must have frozen in place, mouth agape, as all these emotions merged into one overwhelming sensation. A heavy, overwhelming wave of sadness enveloped me. I vaguely recall stumbling backward a few steps, but after that, everything went blank until I woke up in the hospital. Apparently, a monitor had alerted the nurses to my consciousness, as one rushed into my room just moments after I opened my eyes. A doctor followed about a minute later. "How are you feeling, Mr. Banks?" asked a kind, middle-aged nurse with the name tag Nancy. "Like my head is in a vice," I groaned. "We're so glad you woke up so quickly," she said, beaming, while checking my wrist and glancing at the monitor beside the bed. "Why am I in a hospital? How did I end up here?" I asked, just as the doctor entered. "Mr. Banks, I'm Dr. Petra." A short, friendly Indian woman introduced herself. "Let me check your eyes, and then I'll explain," she said. With Nurse Nancy still holding my wrist, Dr. Petra pulled a small light from her pocket. Without shining a direct beam into my eyes, she moved the light back and forth while gently manipulating my eyelids and the skin around my eyes with soft but steady hands for what felt like 2 minutes. When Dr. Petra stood up straight, the nurse let go of my wrist. They both smiled at me, and Dr. Petra said, "Mr. Banks, you've suffered a concussion. According to your wife, you tripped on something in your bedroom and fell backward onto the marble floor in your hallway, hitting your head on the stone. You could have died, but your vital signs are stable, and your concussion is likely not as severe as we initially feared." Suddenly, the weight of sadness overwhelmed me as I remembered what had caused me to fall. My eyes widened, and I moaned loudly, "Barf bag!" Luckily, Nurse Nancy reacted quickly. Although she didn't have a barf bag, she managed to place some sort of container under my chin, just in time. Despite not having eaten lunch that day, I threw up the contents of my stomach, mostly bile. After my stomach had completely settled, I reclined. Nancy placed a cold compress on my forehead, and Dr. Petra conducted another examination. Once she finished, she said, "I'm quite surprised by your regurgitation, Mr. Banks. It might suggest a more severe concussion than I had anticipated, but there are no other indications of it." Could my reflex reaction have been triggered by recalling an emotional crisis that led to my fall? I inquired, already suspecting the answer. Yes, that's quite possible, Doctor. Petra said thoughtfully, stroking her chin. Did you experience such an emotional crisis? Yes, I answered hoarsely. I couldn't stand it emotionally when I saw my wife after having fun with another man, I said with a snort. Oh, and by the way, I continued sarcastically, before either of them could offer me any sympathy or react, where is my devoted wife? She was here earlier but went to pick up your kids from school, Nancy said, starting to regain her composure. I checked the clock. It was 3:28, so she was likely picking them up right then. Have you eaten anything recently? Dr. Petra asked, her face still looking pale. Not since about 8 this morning, I replied. Since your vomiting seems to be emotional rather than related to your concussion, I strongly recommend you eat something, especially before your wife returns with the children, she advised. Do you think I'll just throw it up again when I see her? I asked. No, I don't think so, Dr. Petra said, as long as it's something mild. Nurse Jenkins, could you please have the kitchen send up a bowl of oatmeal? With cinnamon and raisins, no brown sugar, I said, turning to Nancy and trying to be as pleasant as possible. The oatmeal arrived within 5 minutes. I quickly finished it and felt a bit better by the time Nancy came back in and said, You have visitors. In rushed my 3 little ones, each eager to be the first to reach me. Sweethearts, be careful of Daddy's head and neck. I chuckled as I tried to hold all 3 in my arms. They were all talking at once, each more animated than the other. Despite my physical and emotional state, I had to laugh. A full laugh might hurt, but a good chuckle was definitely in order. I barely noticed Allison amidst the commotion with the children. It was obvious Amber had been crying, but now that she saw I wasn't in a dire condition, she brightened up, and the other 2 were all smiles. Allison stood by the door with a bemused expression. While chatting with the kids, I did my best to steer clear of mentioning my injury, and instead focused on their activities from yesterday and today. Allison chimed in a few times with questions or comments, but I ignored her and avoided making eye contact. After about 15 minutes of lively conversation, I saw Nancy say something to Allison. A moment later, Allison announced, Children, Daddy is still hurting and needs to get better, so we need to leave. Say goodbye to his hands with a kiss, and we'll visit him again tomorrow. The kids kissed my hands and waved goodbye as they left. Amber seemed to be in a better mood than when she arrived, and Jerry appeared fine. However, Whitney, upon seeing me in the hospital bed, started to tear up and quickly turned her head as she left, clearly trying to hide her tears. Once the children had gone, Allison called out, Meet Mommy in the elevator lobby. I need to talk to Daddy for a few minutes. Allison then approached me. I hadn't had time to fully plan my response and, given my current state, couldn't execute the scenarios I had considered. So, I simply closed my eyes and listened. Brian, I'm so sorry you had to see me like this. I never wanted you to find out. I'm sorry I'm, not the wife you deserve. I really hope that once you're better we can discuss this, she said, her voice tinged with both moaning and sobbing, though she wasn't actually crying. When I didn't respond, she added, Maybe you'll be ready to talk tomorrow. If you are, just call me. Her final statement was revealing. It was clear she had no intention of visiting me in the hospital unless I reached out and initiated a conversation. Dr. Petra returned around 20 minutes after Allison had left. After another examination, she remarked, You seem surprisingly composed after speaking with your wife. I didn't actually talk to her, I replied dryly. Although I still feel a profound sadness over losing my former life, I'm confident that I'll be able to channel my emotions into constructive action. I won't be vomiting again." "That's good to hear," she said with a smile. "Doctor, how long do you think I'll need to stay here?" "I recommend one more night. If your checkup goes well, you can leave after that. However, you must limit your activities for at least a week, and definitely avoid going to your office for at least 3 or 4 days. I insist," she said with as much firmness as a 5-foot-tall woman could muster. "I promise," I chuckled, reaching out to take her hand. "That is, I promise on the condition that you do not tell my wife you plan to release me on Friday morning. Obviously, I can't ask you to lie to her, but if she inquires, could you suggest that I'll need to stay until Saturday?" "I think I can manage that, Doctor." Petra laughed. "As long as it doesn't involve lying outright. I'll let Nurse Jenkins know the same." I had a hearty dinner, called my parents, who, for obvious reasons Allison hadn't contacted, reached out to my assistant at home and requested a legal pad and pen. That night I was too disoriented to list my tasks, but I was determined to start planning my next steps the following morning. Allison and the kids arrived again around 3:50 p.m. on Thursday. As I had anticipated, she hadn't come to see me earlier in the day, and I wasn't about to call her, though Nancy mentioned that Allison did call the nursing station once to check on my condition. By the time the kids arrived on Thursday, I felt significantly better. It wasn't just because I was recovering, but also because I had a highly productive day. Several people from my office came to visit, including my attorney Gail, who handled my prenup, and my parents joined me for lunch. None of these activities related to my research on proximity sensors. It was all about planning my life outside of work. After a pleasant half-hour with the kids, Nancy came in, as I had asked earlier, and reminded me that I needed to rest. Allison came in just like she did on the first day, but this time I kept my eyes open while she spoke. "Darling, you didn't call today to discuss our situation," she said softly. "I guess I wasn't important enough for you to check on unless I called, right?" I retorted, trying to keep the sarcasm to a minimum, though I probably didn't succeed. "That's not fair," she replied gently. "I didn't want to disturb you if you didn't want to talk. I'll probably want to talk this weekend." "Dang," I said with a hint of sarcasm, "after they release me." "Brian, I'm really sorry. I hope we can get past this," she murmured. Then she took my hand and kissed it. I didn't respond at all. "Goodbye," she said quietly, giving a small wave as she left. I was well aware that she never expressed her love for me or mentioned ending her affair with Roger Mayberry. The only sign of genuine regret I detected was her getting caught. The remaining 10% of my plan, which I hadn't fully developed yet, would now be easy to finalize. Just before visiting hours ended, Allison's parents came to see me. I was somewhat surprised until they subtly revealed their purpose. It seemed that Allison didn't think it would look good if she were the one threatening me with the loss of our children in the event of a divorce, so she had her parents do it. "Allison has confessed her big mistake to us," her mother said while holding my hand. "Oh, really? And what might that be?" I asked sarcastically. After a lengthy pause, her mother finally spoke up. "You already know this very well. It was the cause of your accident. I only hope that you can find it in your heart to forgive her, Brian. You are such a good person and a loving father, and I can't imagine how hard it must be for you not to see your children every day." "You're absolutely right, Ruth," I responded solemnly. My somber tone was just an act. The key objective of my plan was to gain sole custody of the children. After a few more minutes of polite conversation, following the message that I was certain Allison's parents were meant to convey. They departed. Any uncertainty about my course of action had disappeared. On Friday morning, Dr. Petra conducted another exam and then signed my discharge papers. "Remember to take it easy for at least a week," she advised. "Scout's honor," I replied, giving a makeshift Boy Scout salute. Since I had never been a Boy Scout, I wasn't sure how accurate my gesture was, but at least it made her laugh. I thanked Nancy and attempted to give her a $500 cash tip, which she was obliged to decline. Instead, I gave her a cautious hug and left with my assistant, Jack, by 10 a.m. Getting back at Roger Mayberry would be straightforward. Just have him fired. But that wouldn't be enough revenge for me. I wanted to destroy his career. If he simply got another job in a similar field with nearly the same salary, what kind of punishment would that be? My goal was to ensure he lost his security clearance. This would make it nearly impossible for him to find a job with comparable compensation or prestige to what he currently had. After consulting with Gail and a divorce specialist she recommended, and after obtaining Roger's bank account details from payroll since his paychecks were directly deposited, my next step was to see Jezebel. Why her? She would help me secure sole custody of my children. My assistant drove me to Jezebel's office but waited in the car. Even though Jack would eventually be fully briefed on all my plans, I needed to speak with Jezebel alone. I had called ahead, but Jezebel still seemed surprised and excited to see me. "Whoa there, Jezebel," I chuckled as she rushed toward me. "I have a concussion, so I can't give you the big hug I'd like. Can we just kiss each other's hands?" "You bastard," she laughed. "You probably got the concussion just so I couldn't embrace you." We exchanged hand kisses, which was a rather unsatisfactory greeting, but it would have to suffice. Jezebel looked great. She was dressed both stylishly and professionally, and it seemed like she hadn't gained a pound since she was 18, though her chest appeared even more prominent than I remembered. It was probably just that I hadn't seen her in 10 years and had forgotten how well endowed she was. There was a bit of gray in her hair, but it actually enhanced her features. She was still every bit the captivating woman. "Come into my office," she commanded, taking my arm. After expressing how pleased I was to see her again, I got straight to the point. "I need your help, Jezebel," I said, my sadness surfacing once more. "Anything, Brian?" she replied, holding my hand. "You have no idea how much I want to help you, no matter what it is. You helped me achieve my dream, so as long as it doesn't involve killing someone, I'm completely on board." That comment, along with her big smile as she said it, did more to lift my spirits than I ever expected. I chuckled and said, "All right, you asked for it." I didn't hold back any details about what had happened or the part of my reaction where I needed her help. I told her how much my kids mean to me and even showed her their photos. When she heard that my middle child's name was Whitney, she was taken aback. "You named her Whitney?" she exclaimed in surprise. I understood what she was thinking and decided to embellish a bit given the circumstances. "Yes, named after my favorite person from before I got married," I said with a big smile. She became emotional, started crying, and between sobs she said, "You bastard. The only 2 times I've cried in the last decade are because of you." I smiled, held her hand, and said, "Hey, tears of joy are wonderful. I could use some right now." "How can I help with that?" she asked, wiping her tears. "I need you to post adult content featuring my wife on your website and make payments to her bank account for it." After she got past the initial shock, we went over everything thoroughly. She had a lot of great suggestions, including one particularly brilliant idea. You need to ensure that this can't be traced back to you and someone might discover that you and I had a previous association, she said. Is that what you call it, an association? I laughed. Shut up, she giggled. It's my turn to give you advice. I have a friend who can handle this on an adult site even more popular than mine. No questions asked. All you need to do is funnel the money to him, and he'll deposit it into your wife's bank account. Let me call him right now. After a 4-minute phone conversation with her friend, Jezebel made arrangements. She indicated the format of the adult film and mentioned that all the cash received would be transferred to her friends and an equal amount transferred to Allison's account. In addition, she said that her friend would need my wife's signature on the contract with an exemption clause. Could I trick her into signing it or forge it properly? I can, I replied. I'll send it to you today, she said. Wait until tomorrow. I will create a new email account in the library specifically for this purpose and send you an email as soon as she signs up, I replied with a smile. I was in high spirits when I was about to leave Jezebel's office. I took a chance and kissed her on the lips as I left. Fortunately, shortly after our marriage, my wife had insisted on getting a credit card and a bank account solely in her name. I hadn't thought to check them before, but now I would. I had no trouble accessing the numbers from documents she had left lying around at home. I had several advantages for carrying out my revenge. Bank account numbers for both Roger and Allison, Allison's credit card number, enough of my own funds to support any plans I had, and Jezebel's assistance. Additionally, my assistant Jack was completely trustworthy, and I could count on him for anything. A quick note about Jack. He is my assistant, not my secretary. He is one of my highest paid employees, second only to the CEOs and CFOs of my companies. Although he has an engineering degree and excels at analyzing numbers and improving my ambitious projects, he is also willing to do anything to help. That's why he picked me up from the hospital and waited for me at Jezebel's place. By the way, he was a Division I football player in college and played middle linebacker his senior year. At 6 feet, 2 inches tall, and 245 pounds of nearly pure muscle, he often has trouble finding suits that fit without tearing the sleeves. While there are risks involved in my revenge plans, I had planned meticulously and remained optimistic. After Jack dropped me off at my car at my house, I didn't go inside to check if Allison was home. Instead, I had lunch and then called Allison's cell. "Hello, darling. I'm so glad you called. Would you like me to come over?" She answered in her sing-song voice, clearly seeing my number on her caller ID. "That won't be necessary," I replied coldly. "I got released early, so I'll pick up the kids and take them for milkshakes. We'll be home around 5:30. "Oh dear, I should make a nice dinner for you," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "Don't let them spoil their appetites." I cut her off. "Thanks for the parenting advice," I said sarcastically. "See you at 5:30. The kids were excited to see me, asked about my health, and were all bubbly about their activities. They were even more thrilled when I told them we were going to get milkshakes at the local malt shop, which they all loved. After we had all settled into our shakes, I decided to talk to them. "Kids, I want you to know that things are going to change in the future, and none of it is your fault," I said in a calm, matter-of-fact tone. Amber, however, saw right through it and immediately deduced more than I had intended to say. "If you and Mom get divorced, I'm living with you," she said outright. "Are you guys getting divorced?" Whitney asked. "Let's not jump to conclusions," I said, trying to reassure them, especially Whitney, who looked worried. "Mom and I are having some issues, and I'm not sure how things will turn out. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, we both love you with all our hearts, and you three wonderful kids are not to blame in any way for our problems." Amber once again blew me away. "You love us with all your heart. But does Mom have one?" "Mommy loves us," Jerry interjected. "Don't be so sure, little guy," Amber shot back. Trying to stay as diplomatic as possible, I placed a hand over one of Amber's. "Sweetie, I know that Mom loves all of you completely. Sometimes she just doesn't know how to express it. Let's not judge her too harshly, and hope for the best." Whitney was quietly sniffling, but Jerry and Amber seemed to recover quickly, especially when Jerry asked, with all the earnestness of an 8-year-old, "Are you coming to my Little League game at noon tomorrow, Dad? We're playing against the Ravens, and I'm going to pitch." "I wouldn't miss it for the world, son," I chuckled. "What events do you girls have on Saturday?" I asked as cheerfully as I could. I missed 3 days with my hospital stay and didn't get my usual Thursday update. By the time we got home around 5:20, all 3 kids seemed to be in good spirits. I made sure that at least one child was between Allison and me during her greeting, since I wanted to avoid any physical contact with her. After the kids went to bed that night, I retreated to the guest room. "Don't you want to talk?" Allison asked. "I've got a splitting headache from my concussion and just need to take my pain pills and get some sleep. It'll probably be restless, and I don't want to disturb you," I replied, swallowing 2 Tylenol that I passed off as prescription pain pills before closing the door. "I'm available to talk any time," Allison called out as the guest room door closed. I managed to steer clear of any real conversation or intimacy with Allison on both Saturday and Sunday without much trouble, and began putting my plan into action. At first, the tasks were straightforward. Using Allison's credit card, I ordered 2 compact high-tech video cameras and motion detectors for express delivery to the house on Monday. At the library, I printed out the adult contract that Jezebel had emailed me to the account I had created for that purpose, then promptly deleted it. I also printed new beneficiary and health insurance forms from my company's database, included the adult contract as the second-to-last document in the stack, and marked where Allison needed to sign. I anticipated that Allison would be in a cooperative mood over the weekend, though I knew it wouldn't last long. On Sunday, I presented her with the documents, claiming they were for health, disability, and life insurance updates for work, and explained that she and the children were co-beneficiaries of all my insurance. I left the documents with her, instructing her to review them at her convenience. I knew she wouldn't read all the documents, but I expected her to skim through the first 1 or 2. When she noticed her name as a beneficiary on those initial pages, she smiled, clearly thinking that despite my detachment, I wasn't planning on divorcing her. With a big grin, she brought the documents back to me just a few minutes after I handed them over. "All signed, darling," she said cheerfully, handing them to me while I was starting a card game with Whitney and Jerry. "Thanks," I replied, casually tossing the documents into my open briefcase and dealing the cards. I also called the CEO of the company where Roger Mayberry worked and instructed him to arrange for the federal agency responsible for our security clearances to conduct reviews of the 5 individuals in Mayberry's division. Given the sensitive nature of our work, we are subject to unannounced security reviews, much like some organizations are subject to random prohibited substances testing. This way, none of the employees would know that the review was initiated by their employer, rather than by the government. On Monday morning, after the kids had left for school, Allison insisted on having a talk. "Brian, we can't ignore what happened. If we do, it will eat away at you and destroy our relationship," she began, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. I wanted to ask, "What relationship?" but held back. Instead, I said, Allison, my head is still spinning from what I saw, and I need to clear my mind before we can have a meaningful conversation. I don't plan on doing anything hasty. All right, darling, she replied after a brief pause, sounding content if not entirely pleased. I hope you get better soon. I really want to show you how much I care. I miss you. I managed a smile, which was painful, and said, I miss them too. It was true. Despite my current feelings, I did miss her. I need to head to the country club for a social committee meeting in about half an hour and should be back by 2 to pick up the kids from school. Will you be okay on your own? She asked. I wanted to respond with, I'll find out soon enough, but kept my response in check. Have a good time, I'll be fine, I said. She made it too easy. About half an hour after she left, the cameras arrived by courier. I called Jack, and he came over. Together, we set up the cameras, on-off switches, and motion detectors in the master bedroom in less than an hour, handling all the equipment with latex gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints or DNA. Then, we needed to direct the feeds to Allison's computer. Though I'm good with computers, Jack is exceptional. We just need to find her password, and I can hook up the cameras to her computer in about 10 minutes. I've got the best password cracking software on my laptop. I'll link it to hers and get started, Jack said, still wearing his latex gloves. After Jack launched the program, he started to say, what we can do while this runs, but was interrupted by a beep. What's that? I asked. Is it malfunctioning? I don't think so. Holy crap, it's already cracked, he chuckled. How is that even possible? I asked. The software tests the top 1,000 most common passwords first before using the cracking algorithms. Ha! Her password is Princess, which is the 28th most common password according to the software. Figures, I laughed. She never listened to my tech advice, so why would she have heeded my suggestion to use random symbols for her password? True to his word, within 10 minutes, Jack had set up the cameras to record to a file with a generic name on Allison's computer. In another 5 minutes, he had configured it so I could access the file from my office anytime and control the cameras and motion detectors remotely. On Tuesday, feeling good, I went into work and activated the cameras and motion detectors before leaving. I arranged for one of my shell companies in the Cayman Islands to transfer $10,000 to Roger Mayberry's bank account. After that, feeling emotionally positive and physically improved from my concussion, I actually got some real work done. Tuesday night, after the kids went to bed, Allison came up to me. Why don't you come back to our bed tonight? You must feel better if you were able to work today. Yes, I replied. I feel almost fine. When I went to bed, Allison was wearing outerwear. Her persistence still forced me to make love to her, and the only thing I thought about after that was, I'm going to miss this body. On Wednesday and Thursday, I almost allowed myself to imagine that Allison realized how much she had hurt me, truly loved me, and might even have broken up with Mayberry. However, I knew that these thoughts were just fantasies, not reality. This was confirmed when I looked at the recording made on Thursday afternoon. My faithful wife was there, having fun with her lover. I could only stand it for a few minutes. Until I filed Allison's divorce papers, the only thing I could do with her was enjoy her body. Although I was relieved to learn that this video played a crucial role in my application for sole custody of the children, the wave of sadness returned briefly and was uninvited. Why couldn't she just keep Mayberry at bay, and who knows if there were others? I asked myself a rhetorical question. On Friday morning, I uploaded Allison's video to a paid site, sent $5,000 in cash to Jezebel, and by Friday evening, $5,000 had been transferred from the site to Allison's bank account, and the video was posted for all paying customers to watch. Unfortunately, since there was no press release from Mayberry on the website, they had to pixelate his face, but I was immensely glad that the section of the website where the video was available. Over the next 2 weeks, 2 more videos were uploaded to the site, 2 more $5,000 deposits were transferred to Allison's bank account, and another $10,000 was transferred from another company in the Cayman Islands to Mayberry's bank account. Now I needed a strike before Allison and Mayberry got their month-end bank statements and wondered what the hell was going on. Although I had the pleasure of playing with Allison's body 4 times in those 2 weeks, despite her requests, I avoided traditional intimacy with her. I did a good acting job, starting to cry when she asked me to do it, said in a broken voice, "Allison, I'm not quite ready for this yet." When I said that, she replied as if she were a truly caring person. "I understand, honey. Let me know when you're ready." The day after the 3rd video became available to subscribers, Mayberry conducted a security check. I'm not sure how this happened, cough cough, but the reviewer had a printed copy of one of the videos featuring Mayberry and Allison, as well as Mayberry's bank statement. Mayberry was the 3rd person to be interviewed that day, so he probably didn't know that his interview was the only one that was important. Since the CEO was supposed to receive a copy of the lie detector test results, including questions and answers, by the end of the day I received a transcript of Mayberry's interview. After Mayberry was hooked up to a lie detector and preliminary questions were asked, the columnist moved on to the main question. "Mr. Mayberry, do you have any personal actions that could potentially be used to blackmail you?" "No, I don't think so," Mayberry replied, triggering a noticeable motion of the lie detector. "I'd like to show you a video, Mr. Mayberry," the columnist said, tapping a few buttons on his iPad. "Who is the woman you were seen with 2 weeks ago on Thursday?" Mayberry's face paled noticeably as he weighed whether to lie to him or tell the truth, and which option might negatively affect his security clearance. He decided to be honest. "Allison Banks." "Isn't she married to one of your colleagues, Brian Banks?" Well, actually, Brian Banks works for a related company, although his office is in the same building as mine." "It's a big building," Mayberry stammered. "Have you ever thought that an affair with a married colleague could lead to blackmail?" I never thought about it," Mayberry muttered. "Have you received any payments from foreign organizations since you received your last security clearance?" "No way," Mayberry replied indignantly. "Mr. Mayberry, let me show you this month's bank statement. Can you explain the deposits from 2 separate Cayman Island-based companies?" There was a lengthy silence before Mayberry, his voice trembling, responded, "I have no idea. I've never seen these before. It must be a mistake." "A mistake involving 2 unidentified Cayman Island companies?" the reviewer asked. "Yes, someone is framing me," Mayberry protested, clearly agitated. "Did someone also fabricate the video of you and Mrs. Banks?" the reviewer asked, with a hint of sarcasm despite his duty to remain impartial. After he answered a few more questions, the interview ended. Mayberry remained silent when, after removing the electrodes from the lie detector, the expert informed him, "Mr. Mayberry, until further notice, you should not enter into any contact with anyone regarding confidential information. You are also prohibited from contacting Mr. or Mistress Banks or any of the 2 corporations that transferred money to your account. Failure to comply with this requirement will result in prosecution." That night, after the interview with Mayberry, I felt exceptionally good, really good. Allison sensed my high spirits and started flirting with me after dinner. We went to bed as soon as we were sure the children were asleep. We were lying snuggled up to each other. Allison said, "Honey, how about we get some rest and then I'll give you pleasure, and after that you can walk through my door." I chuckled to myself, thinking, she's really good at acting, before meeting her gaze. "Allison, I'm never going anywhere near this place again. Who knows how many other people visit this place every week? This is too much." Her reaction was priceless, muttering, "What do you mean?" Blushing and muttering incoherently while I laughed, she jumped out of bed and headed for the guest room. The next day, when Allison took the kids to school, she gave me an icy look. As soon as they left, I rang the phone, and a few seconds later the doorbell rang. "It's for you," I said with a chuckle. "How dare you talk to me like that?" Allison screamed. "I won't be long," I replied, laughing. When Allison opened the door, the courier handed her the divorce papers, and she heard, "Mrs. Allison Banks?" "Yes. You have been served." Along with the divorce papers were photos of her with Mayberry and information about the site with a password to access it. "You didn't think I'd find out that you were selling your films, did you?" "What kind of slob can you be?" I asked when I saw her staring at the kitchen table in a daze. "Did you even bother to look at what you look like on the website? It's the only way to find out," I screamed when she grabbed a piece of paper with the website address and password. I was shocked when my assistant brought this to my attention. "Is it enough that you disrespected me by cheating with a jerk in our bed, but now you're broadcasting it and profiting from it?" What? I don't understand what's going on," she muttered, bursting into tears. "I'm taking the kids for the weekend," I said, getting up. "Make sure you hire the best lawyer you can find. Your movie earnings should come in handy, because you're going to need him." On the same day, Mayberry was fired. He was taken out of the building and stripped of his security clearance. About an hour before I was supposed to leave to pick up the kids for the weekend, my secretary called. "Brian, there's been a report that Roger Mayberry is drunk and yelling your name in the parking lot. Should I call the police?" "No, Sherry," I chuckled. "Call Jack and ask him to come here immediately." It was too good to miss. When Jack arrived, we went to the window where we could watch Mayberry from one of the best camera angles. It was clear from his uncertain movements that he was intoxicated. We quickly worked out a plan. Jack would exit through a side door and stay out of sight of the cameras next to the building, while I would confidently exit through the main entrance. As soon as Mayberry saw me, he screamed, "You're a jerk, Banks. You got me fired and I lost my security clearance. I know that. I'm going to punish you." I made my way, more at a trot than a run, to a place that was in the camera's field of view, next to where Jack was. I let Mayberry get close enough to hit me. Although his blow only grazed my shoulder, I fell as if it was the strongest blow in my life. As Mayberry loomed over me, ready to strike again, Jack got into the camera frame, grabbed Mayberry and pushed him away. Mayberry flew 4 feet back and lost consciousness. Jack came over and helped me up, and I pretended to be stunned, leaning against the car. Jack called 911. It was all visible on the surveillance cameras, and the police arrived within 3 minutes. Mayberry was handcuffed to a stretcher in an ambulance, and one of the police officers escorted him to the hospital. I filled out the paperwork to file an assault charge, then picked up the kids, and we went to a beautiful mountain resort for the weekend. At the end of the weekend, I told the kids that Allison and I were getting divorced. Amber seemed pleased, and the other two were surprisingly calm, reassured by my promise that we would both remain loving and supportive parents. When we got back Sunday night, Allison wasn't as unpleasant as I had expected. To prepare for a potential outburst from her, I had moved all my most valuable possessions and much of my clothing to a temperature-controlled storage facility. However, I had no intention of leaving the house. After the kids told her about our weekend, she and I had a conversation. "Brian, I know you set up this video recording, though I'm not sure how you managed it," she said, though her tone was more conciliatory than I anticipated. "No apology, no admission of a mistake, no request for forgiveness?" I asked. "Just blaming me for something that, from all the evidence, I clearly didn't do," I added, trying to sound outraged in case she was recording our conversation. "I've been busy this weekend, Brian. I hired a lawyer and a computer expert. I don't know how you did it, but you covered your tracks very well. It's going to be tough for me to overcome this unfit mother accusation you've made. I'm hoping we can reach a resolution on custody." "Sure, Allison. You give me sole custody in the house so the kids don't have to move, and I'll grant you generous visitation rights. I'll also buy you a house for you and Mayberry. Have you heard he's not only out of a job, but out of a career?" "I don't want to share a house with Roger. It was never about that," she started to explain. I cut her off quickly. "I don't want to hear it, Allison," I snapped. I regained my composure and continued, "You can live with whoever you want, I don't care. I'm just making an offer." After a pause and a few tears, she continued, "Look, I know you might think I'm a terrible mother, but that's not true. I love the kids more than anything, and the thought of not living with them is unbearable. I also don't see how dragging this through court would benefit either of us. I know you'll probably try to discredit me in every way possible, and I just can't handle that. Plus, neither of us wants the kids exposed to all the ugly details or the videos." "I agree that we don't want the kids to know the details," I said thoughtfully. "What do you suggest?" I asked, genuinely interested. "My lawyer recommends using a mediator, preferably a former family court judge. I'll request either sole or joint custody, and you can do the same. The mediator will review everything, including the kids' wishes, and will accept their decision. This way we keep things confidential and reach a resolution much faster," she explained. I was actually surprised by her level of reasonableness. It seemed she had come to realize that I was stronger than she had previously thought, likely after having several lengthy discussions with Roger Mayberry. I suggested setting up a joint meeting with our lawyers early next week to finalize the details. "I have one condition regarding your proposal. I categorically will not agree to joint custody. It's too difficult for the kids, and I want sole custody. If the mediator decides otherwise, I will comply, but I do not propose it myself." I took Allison to the master bedroom and I stayed in the guest room. I didn't explain my reasoning because I didn't want to add to the stress, but I was determined not to sleep where Mayberry was. I wasn't sure if it was even possible to remove all traces of him from the bed. We had a joint meeting with our lawyers on Tuesday. We both instructed them to act according to our requirements in accordance with the law. We did not want further negotiations. The agreement we reached was a 50-50 split of all marital assets, excluding what was covered by the prenup, which protected 90% of our wealth. It included the name of the mediator, a former family court judge with a strong reputation, the scheduling of the hearing, and the deadline for the mediator's private ruling. It also outlined the child support I would pay if Allison received either sole or joint custody, the maintenance amount I would provide for 2 years, or until Allison remarried, whichever came first, and restrictions on her associating with Mayberry in the presence of the children. Though she was offended, she agreed since she had no intention of seeing him again. We agreed not to influence the children's statements to the mediator, how much Allison could spend on new housing, whether house, condo, or apartment, if I were awarded sole custody and she had to move out, and the specific arrangements for joint custody or visitation rights if either of us received sole custody. We spent the entire day working out the details, but we managed to finalize everything. The potential mediator was contacted the next day. He agreed to take on the case and his payment terms, which would be split 50-50 from our joint assets not covered by the prenup. We even scheduled a briefing date in 2 weeks and a hearing date in 4 weeks. Though it wasn't included in the contract, Allison and I privately agreed not to bring anyone else into the house while we were jointly residing there, and that the person required to move out would do so within 2 weeks after the custody arrangement was finalized. Additionally, I agreed to have my lawyer threaten to sue the adult site if they didn't remove Allison's videos, and to refund them the money. This was straightforward. One call to Jezebel took care of it. Allison and I were polite to each other while we waited for the hearing. I've never tried to influence the children, and as far as I know, she hasn't either, and we've never made rude or even sarcastic remarks to each other, even in private. "I want you to take a good look at what you're giving up one last time," she said, unbuttoning a button. I couldn't help myself. She pointed to my catch and said, "I see that he's working," and then left the room with a devilish grin on her face. On the day of the hearing, I was anxious despite being confident that I had the advantage, and the worst outcome would likely be joint custody. However, since I desperately wanted sole custody, I was nearly frantic. The hearing itself went fairly well, but just before the judge was set to interview the children, he made comments that made my stomach churn. It seemed like he might be favoring joint custody. Before he even began speaking with the children, he threw us a curveball. "I see you have agreed to observe my interviews with the children via closed-circuit TV," the mediator said. "I'm afraid I can't agree to that. I only realized moments ago that this would compromise the essential honesty and trust I need to establish with the children. If either of you can't accept meeting with each child privately, I'll need to refund your fee and recommend another mediator. Since the children's interviews are scheduled for tomorrow, which is a day off from school, please let me know by then." I was almost tempted to voice my disagreement and suggest that we seek a different mediator, one less inclined toward joint custody than the current one seemed to be. However, my attorney persuaded me otherwise, especially since she was aware of Amber's hostility toward Allison, and knew from previous experience that this mediator, when he was a judge, gave significant weight to the children's preferences. With Amber only a year away from being able to make her own decisions under state law, the judge was likely to prioritize her opinions over those of any other mediator we might choose. Before Allison and I headed home, we met with our attorneys and agreed to the mediator's terms. We also consented to avoid questioning the children afterward about what they had said. That evening at dinner, Allison made some remarks that I suspected might be interpreted by the kids as her advocating for joint custody. I merely shot her a stern look and remained silent. Amber noticed and gave me a knowing, sly smile. The following day, the mediator spoke privately with each of the children. Jerry's session lasted about 20 minutes, Whitney's around 30 minutes, and Amber's took over an hour. After Amber finished, she gave me a thumbs up when she was sure Allison and her lawyer weren't watching. According to our agreement, Allison's parents took the kids out for a meal after their interviews and were instructed to bring them back to our house around 4 p.m. After our lunch break, the mediator unexpectedly announced his decision. We were taken aback because he still had another week, according to the contract, to make his decision, so he wasn't obligated to decide right away. He didn't even want to hear the 30-minute closing arguments prepared by the attorneys. After reviewing all the evidence and prioritizing the best interests of the children, I am awarding sole custody of all 3 children to the father, Brian Banks. Additionally, I find that the contract entered into by the parties before the case was submitted is fair and in the best interests of the children, so the case will be settled on those terms. I will provide a certified copy of this decision on Monday for submission to family court with your settlement. Thank you for trusting me with this case, and best of luck moving forward. Allison and I both cried, though for different reasons. The drive home was somber. I wasn't in the mood to gloat, and she was deeply upset. I was again engulfed by a sense of sadness over the finality of our family's breakup, even though it was resolved as favorably for me as possible under the circumstances. That night when we told the children, Allison was distant, so I did most of the talking. Jerry and Whitney were sad and gave Allison genuine hugs, while Amber offered a perfunctory hug. I spoke only positively about Allison and explained the visitation arrangements. Less than a week after the hearing, I bought another house for Allison, and she moved in within the agreed 2-week period. The children and I helped her, as did her parents and brother, and we also hired a moving company to handle the larger items from our house, including the king-sized bed from the master bedroom. When the divorce was finalized a few months later, I threw a victory party at home to thank all the people who helped me, as well as my closest friends and parents. I didn't explain to the children what the purpose of the party was. I just said it was a celebration in general. Amber, who was 13 by that time, of course, understood everything. Just before the guests were due to arrive and I was making some final preparations in the study, she came in and closed the door. She sat me down and then settled on my lap. "Daddy, how happy are you that the custody agreement was concluded this way?" It's a difficult question, even for her. "Why am I very happy, Amber? Why are you asking?" I replied. She broke into a big smile. I knew it would work when I talked to the mediator. I told him that one day when I came home sick, I saw my mom and this guy from Mayberry at our house, and that it had a terrible effect on me. My response was overwhelming. "Have you seen them?" "Honestly, it doesn't really matter," she said with a shrug. She was unfaithful to me, and I would have refused to go with her if she had received custody. I thought it would be better for Jerry and Whitney to stay with us. I just thought you should know," she finished with a big smile. She kissed me on the cheek, jumped off my lap, and left. I decided not to go into details. What I've been focusing on since the victory celebration is Jezebel. Jezebel showed up at the party looking amazing. She immediately found a common language with Jerry and Whitney and played ball and pepper with Jerry for about half an hour. She was much better at it than I've ever been. Then Jezebel spent time alone with Whitney. I'm not sure what they discussed, but they chatted and laughed for an hour. Amber was a little more reserved with Jezebel compared to the other kids, but it seems she still had a positive reaction, and they chatted about fashion. Jezebel did not fail to draw my attention to our family. In the middle of the party, she took me aside, into the office, grabbed my hand, and whispered, "Now you have no excuse for not letting me be with you. Have your parents stay with the kids tonight and come home with me? I promise that you will be alive when I let you go tomorrow at 10 in the morning, but I can't promise that you will be safe and sound." When she saw the look in my eyes, she didn't wait for me to speak. She kissed me and then dramatically left the room. That night, Jezebel almost stunned me. I've never experienced what I've experienced with her before. As I was leaving, I said, "Jezebel, I don't understand what you see in me, but I really like being with you. Do we have a chance for a real relationship?" She looked into my eyes and licked her lips. I see in you a kind, generous, intelligent, and sympathetic person with great qualities. How about we go to the resort for 3 days on the weekend of the 14th and see if we both want a serious relationship? To be honest, I'm tired of casual meetings. I need a man who is devoted to me alone. She kissed me one more time before closing the door and said, "Go home to your beautiful children." 2 years after my victory celebration, my life has undergone several changes. All 3 children are well-adjusted, happy, and excelling in school, social activities, and other areas of their lives. Allison has behaved appropriately and made full use of her visitation rights without any misuse. Amber now has a much improved relationship with her compared to when we were together. In fact, Amber even joined Allison and the other 2 kids at Allison's parents' lake house for 10 days last summer and returned without any negative feedback. My business is thriving, and I'm earning more than ever. Although my ownership of the operating companies was unintentionally revealed when a government report was mistakenly sent to several employees, this issue has been resolved, and I haven't been treated any differently as a result. Roger Mayberry left town shortly after the victory party. According to the only employee still in contact with him, he now has an entry-level sales position with an electronics company on the West Coast that doesn't handle sensitive technology. The children have more than accepted Jezebel. All 3 treat her more like a friend than a mother, and they really enjoy her company. After 2 years of being close at every opportunity, Jezebel decided that we needed to be exclusive. Last month, she sold her website and moved in with the kids. Despite the fact that she does not want to get married, she only wants to see me and wants to fulfill the duties of a friend, mother for children, while simultaneously running a small company selling specialized clothing over the internet, using an extension that I installed in the house specifically for this purpose. At the same time as the extension was being built, I also installed the highest quality sound insulation in the master bedroom. Now, our entertainment will not interfere with anyone, and we will be able to fully enjoy each other. I'm happy.